It's 9 p.m. and time to put the spotlight on the India development debate. The final countdown for Vijay Mallya's extradition has begun. The Westminster Magistrates Court today finally began the hearing in the Indian government's plea for Mallya's extradition in a money laundering case involving his grounded carrier Kingfisher Airlines. Mallya has been declared a willful defaulter by several banks, owes more than 9,000 crore rupees to Indian lenders. The UK court, which is hearing a joint petition by the CBI and the Enforcement Directorate, is expected to give its verdict by December end. Ruling against him doesn't necessarily mean immediate extradition of Mallya, who can of course approach a higher court, and that could prolong the government's efforts to bring back the former liquor baron to India and make him face the courts of law here. Speaking to the Times Network, Mallya, however, said the charges leveled against him are false and fabricated, adding that his submissions before the UK court will only prove his innocence.
Now, interestingly, Mallya owes more than 9,000 crore rupees to banks here in India, and there is no debate over the fact that he should be brought back and made to clear his dues to his bankers. But the aggression that the government shows to get him extradited and the hype around the case raise some really key questions. Is Mallya the biggest culprit as far as bad loans are concerned? The answer to that is a no. What about bigger defaulters? Will his arrest work as a deterrent against cheating and siphoning of funds by errant promoters? More importantly, is the Mallya chase more about winning some political brownie points rather than the NPA crackdown itself? The big Mallya chase and what it means to the India's bad loan mess is a big topic of discussion right here on the India development debate this evening. I'm Supriya Srinath in New Delhi, and joining me in Mumbai is my colleague and co-anchor Sandeep Gurumurthy. Joining us also on the show, a stellar panel right here, Amarjeet Singh Chandiok, Senior Advocate and ex-Additional Solicitor General of India. I've got Charan Singh, Visiting Faculty, IIM Bangalore. Gopal Jain, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court. Neerav Shah, Partner, DSK Legal Advocates and Solicitors. And of course, our Consulting Editor, Maithili Busnurmat. So thanks each one of you for taking time out and joining us on this edition of the India Development Debate. Mr. Chandiok, if I may begin with you, the extradition proceedings have finally begun. How big a deal is this as far as India's chase of Vijay Mallya is concerned?
You see, the position is this, that the extradition laws are extremely challenging and difficult. You will have to show to that court that the extradition is very necessary. And if Vijay Mallya, what he says today, he had in fact says he had offered money to the government to pay off his loans to the extent of over 4,000 or 4,500 crores that he owes them. Now, but if the liquidation proceedings or the liquidation value of his assets is less than that, then I thought the government should have negotiated with him, probably instead of extradition, to do that. But of course, that does not compromise. If there is actually an offence committed by him on the Indian soil, then he is bound to be extradited and brought back to India. But the process is extremely difficult. It is not that easy. But the first papers submitted by CBI and ED before the Magistrates Court were not very happy, and I don't think they were making any foolproof case for the government of India to extradite Mallya. But subsequent papers having been put in, how they have been able to place before the court is a question to be seen in adjudicating authority when the matter is sub judice. But I do not think there are many more defaulters, as you rightly said, in this country. Whether only default in prepayment of loans would be essential, would be key core to bring him back to the country is a big question. And I do not think the judicial process today helps the government of India only for being defaulter for loans to be extradited from London. However, if the offence made in PMLA is actually made out before that court, maybe there could be 1% chance of his coming back to the country.
Fine. That's a fair point, and I do want to debate the legal possibilities of this extradition turning out to be successful, the next steps, before we talk about the big picture. And we've got some stellar lawyers joining us on the panel. Gopal Jain, to you first. Given the fact that Mallya can potentially challenge this, whatever the order were to be in a high court and then subsequently the Supreme Court, is it fair to say that this is going to be a long, drawn-out affair, and contrary to the narrative being built in the media, it's not as if he's going to be extradited end of this month. This is going to be a painful, long drawn affair.
Yes, let's just look at it in context. If you look at the track record of extradition from the UK, I believe it's one or almost negligible, close to zero. So that itself shows you the degree of difficulty. It's like climbing the Himalayas, a very, very difficult ask. And B, as you said, it's a long drawn test match. It's not T20 or a 50 over match. The legal process will take time, step 1, step 2, challenge, etc. So really, it looks as if it's a long road or a long journey.
All right, it looks like a long journey ahead, but I'm going to take this across very quickly to Nirav Shah. And Nirav Shah, given the fact that, the challenge has been made not for loan default, the extradition is not being sought on loan default, but actually the charges of criminal conspiracy and cheating. Now, if proven, are those strong grounds for Mallya to be extradited?
Let's presume for a second that the government of India proves those charges of criminal conspiracy. In my view, there are a couple of other difficult challenges that the government of India will need to overcome. The first one being the defense taken by Mallya under Article 9(1)(a) of the extradition treaty between India and UK, whereby he says that he is being prosecuted for the political opinions that he holds, and if extradited, there will be a serious prejudice caused to his trial in India, and on that grounds he is defending the case of the government of India against his extradition. Additionally, he is also taken the plea that the conditions of jails in India is so poor that it affects his human rights, and the government of India will have to make out a case under section 87 of the UK Extradition Act, read with the European Convention on Human Rights. Let us not forget, little over a year ago, a similar argument was made in the case of Sanjeev Chawla, who was a bookie who was wanted by the Indian government in the 2000 crate scandal, and the same argument was successfully argued in the courts, and the extradition was refused. Now, in case of Mr. Vijay Mallya, if this argument has to succeed, then the government of India has to make out a compelling case as to what has changed from November 2016 till now, and what exactly is the condition of the prisons in our country. A simple search on the net will throw up astonishing results in terms of all our major jails are operating far in excess of their actual capacity. And this is something which he is going to use against the government of India's arguments to say that this violates his human rights.
You made 2-3 very important points, and I think that's something that we will debate. But let me get a quick word from Maithili before I go back to the lawyers. Maithili, the UK court will consider if he can get a fair trial here in India or not. And Vijay Mallya will use the fact that there is this media witch hunt against him. He will say that that there is prejudice by the political establishment against him. He's been made a scapegoat. Could that sort of weaken, in some sense, weaken the defense of the Indian government, of CBI and ED, in extraditing Vijay Mallya?
I would certainly think so, Sandeep, for the simple reason that, Vijay Mallya is not the largest defaulter. And let's also remember that default is very different from fraud. You can default, and you can default for reasons much beyond fraud, nothing to do with fraud at all. So it's important to make this distinction that default per se is not fraud. Also, when a company or an individual defaults, it could be for reasons that have entirely to do for business reasons. So in fact, default is part of business risks. So I think Vijay Mallya has a perfectly good defense to say there are people in India who have who have defaulted for much larger amounts. They are not being persecuted like this. So why am I being singled out? So I think he has a very strong case also to say that no distinction is being made between default and fraud, and the fraud or any kind of criminal conspiracy has not been proved. So I think he has a very strong defense, and which is why, apart from what the lawyers on the panel have said, that it is very, very difficult to actually extradite. So given that, I think he has a very strong case, and the government is going to have a very uphill battle, particularly because the CBI's track record in all these cases is also not very good. So for a variety of reasons, Government of India is going to have a very, very tough battle on its hands.
All right, tough battle is the word that's coming in from our consulting editor Maithili Busnurmal, but I'll take it across quickly to Professor Charan Singh, who's also joining us all the way from IIM Bangalore. And Professor Charan Singh, just comment on the point that Sandeep asked and the one that Maithili responded to, which is, the fact that Vijay Mallya will of course resort to media, will of course resort to prejudice by political establishment, and does that in some sense weaken his case, weaken the government's case and strengthen his own defense? Because like Maithili pointed out, there is a discrimination between default and fraud. He has defaulted, yes, but there have been no criminal proceedings that have been established against him so far.
Yes, I agree with you. I have heard the arguments given by both the lawyers on the panel as well as Maithili, and I think it's a real long road to cover. And in addition to that, if I have your permission, can I share some of my economic concerns regarding this Vijay Mallya case? If I can, and the key concern that I have is, while we have just moved up on this and improved our status on the ease of doing business, exactly this is what the businessman, Indian businessman, is going to be facing prosecution in a London court which has an international audience. That is causing me lots of concern. If this linen has to be washed in a London court, then sooner or later, if the World Bank and others catch up on ease of doing business and say this is what the exit policy is in India, then what repercussions does it have as far as Indian businessmen are concerned, and what are the repercussions as far as the business environment in the country is concerned? And I say this at this juncture because when we are on the cusp of a demographic dividend and we have that demographic advantage, it is obvious that the private sector has to play a very important role in creating employment opportunities. And in this creation of employment opportunities, if businessmen feel prosecuted, then what is that they're going to contribute into policy making? So my feeling is that this whole episode of Vijay Mallya seems to be spinning out of hand.
Okay.
The longer it takes in a London court to get it decided, the more international coverage it gets. What will be the repercussions on business in India?
Okay.
That's my bigger issue with this case.
Professor Singh, you've raised a very valid point, and that is something that we will debate about, especially in light of the IBC, ordinance as well. What does that do to entrepreneurship is something we will talk about. But just one point I want to make before I take it to Gopal Jain, which is, the point that you said about it being debated, it being tried in London court. It's not out of choice. It's because he fled the country and moved to London that it's being done in London court. I'm sure the Indian authorities would be happy to have this fought in the Indian judicial platform. But, Gopal Jain, let me come to you. The simple point is the UK court recently rejected an extradition plea of a UK-based bookie, Sanjeev Chawla, citing poor jail conditions at the Tihar jail where he was supposed to be taken to. What can the Indian government, produce in the court to ensure that our case is not weakened on account of these jail conditions or issues like that? How can we, get over this issue? Gopal Jain.
So let's look at it like this, that if the UK court has formed an opinion, single inverted commas, of an Indian jail, and as recently as last year, almost a year back, then they'll have to show a dramatic change or improvement. For example, if you create a model jail or conditions which are similar to something in Europe, right, which would pass muster of, let's say, the human rights laws there, or what I call the prison rules and regulations, that's the only way you can turn the tide. But I don't think that can happen overnight. And these are some of the things that you must think of before you initiate action. According to me, all these things were brewing for a long period of time, and action should have been taken in a timely manner. Now, only because he's fled and left India, we have decided to take this route. Obviously, these defaults had happened a long time back. There were existing laws then. The IBC has come in. It's got further stringent now. So there are so many legal measures which could have been taken in a timely manner. Now all that we are doing is that since the horse is bolted, we are trying to see, okay, which is the best way of trying to put the horse back, or the genie back in the box. So you're left with this situation where we lost on this point a year back. I don't think any significant or dramatic change has happened as of now. And as you rightly said, what it will take is an even bigger ask, and that will take further time. So these are all things that you need to first plan before you trigger a legal action, because it has larger ramifications and we don't want to be losing these cases, and it looks as if it was a knee-jerk reaction and not something which was carefully thought through to its logical end.
No, that's a very valid point. We can't be seen losing these cases because that goes against the whole grain of trying to get a fugitive back to repay what he legally and rightfully owes to Indian banks. And that's a very valid point that you're making. But Mr. Chandiok, let me come to you. Are the odds stacked against the government given the track record? Since 1993 to now, we have seen one instance of an extradition from UK to India, and that too on account of Gujarat riots, and where the accused did not challenge the extradition. Is it a tall task, or do you believe, given the high political stakes, this may perhaps play out a little differently? This may not end up being bunched with a lot of extradition requests that never really reach fruition.
But I don't think it's correct to say that there cannot be extradition at all. But the fact of the matter is, as Gopal has rightly said, the conditions in Indian jail is absolutely poor. And added to a few days ago example, when a superintendent has been hit by an inmate who's one of the persons accused, and he carries with him a knife and chops off the neck of a person, then what is the condition in the Indian jail? So he will also say, here is the government which is a political vendetta against me. Media is against me. There's a pre-drawn already decision taken for me. Therefore, where am I going to get a fair trial at the hands of the Indian court? The prejudice is so much against me in every parliament debate. Everywhere everybody has spoken is only talk of Vijay Mallya, as if we are obsessed with him. That very fact itself would influence the court in coming to a decision that extradition should not be granted. Conditions one part, and look at Article 21 of the Constitution.
Okay, I think we've lost the link there with Mr. Chandiok. But Neerav Shah, coming on the point that Mr. Chandiok was making on the fact that, that the odds appear to be stacked against the government, given the track record as far as extradition is concerned. What can we do to make this different? Obviously, it's a high stakes as far as politics are concerned. India has taken a lot of its political capital on this issue, including the Prime Minister has taken this issue up with Theresa May. So a lot of political capital has been invested in this case. Is that alone enough to ensure it goes through its logical conclusion and Vijay Mallya is extradited?
To my mind, just raising the political capital may not turn out to be sufficient in this case. Coming away from the fact that there's too much at stake for the government to bring back Vijay Mallya, at the end of the day, the magistrate who's hearing the case has to test the law as it is applicable today in England with respect to the extradition. And it's going to be challenging for the government of India to overcome these challenges. A simple search on the net with respect to the capacity of some of the leading jails we have, like Tihar Jail, Arthur Road Jail, Baikala Jail and Thane Central Jail. All these jails have inmates more than double their actual capacity. And in order for us to ensure that in future we do not have an embarrassing situation like what we are having today with Mr. Vijay Mallya, I think a separate issue of a systemic prison reforms needs to be undertaken to ensure that in case we land ourselves in a similar situation in future, we are at least equipped to meet with that argument.
You know, Maithili, I'm going to come to you on the point that, Mr. Neerav Shah did make, which is that, the judge will decide on the basis of law. But there is a lot of politics, there's a lot of narrative, there is a lot of, the principle of paying back that's being applied here. Is it only fair to ask that, do you believe India can at all afford to lose this case?
Well, I don't know whether we can afford to or not, because the fact is that we do not have a very strong case. Unlike in the case of the Satyam scam, where the promoter Ramlinga Raju admitted to the fraud and so it was possible to convict him. Here Vijay Mallya's constant defense is that he is being framed and he is not guilty. Now in such a situation where the only thing that we know for a fact is that he has defaulted, his company rather has defaulted in the dues to the bank, it's going to be very difficult to establish that he was complicit in it, that it was done with his knowledge. And unless you establish that, the basic principle in law is innocent till proved guilty. So you cannot condemn a man without actually having very definite proof which can be established. And talking about the condition of Indian jails, let's not forget in the mid-90s, the Brisket King, Rajan Pillai, he was convicted and he was put in prison and he died under very suspicious circumstances. So all these cases, subsequently there was a great deal of prison reform that followed Rajan's death, but the fact is that the conditions in our jail, the kind of witch hunting that has been going on, the way in which Vijay Mallya has been proceeded against, even when we have much larger defaults, we have corporate borrowers that defaulted in the range of 50,000 crores, and very little has been done as far as proving criminal neglect and criminal involvement is concerned. So there would be many reasons that Vijay Mallya could put up as a perfectly comprehensive, valid defense. In fact, even in our own Supreme Court, if you remember the A.R. Antule case, where the Supreme Court clearly stated that even if parties had made large political donations to him and subsequently had got contracts, unless one can establish that there was a quid pro quo, guilt cannot be proven, guilt cannot be taken for granted. So I think it's going to be very difficult for the government to prove. So I think maybe the government should think in terms of some alternate means and slowly back away rather than losing face.
But Gopal Jain, let's talk about the big picture. We've spoken about the extradition and the possibilities and the next steps, but let's talk about the big picture. And do you believe that this has sent a strong signal? In some ways, does this signal a new order in India's NPA chase? For far too long, we've been lenient on, fat cat promoters who have sort of taken these loans and really not had the sense of credit discipline to return them. Do you believe in some sense this signals a new order in India's NPA crackdown?
I think the answer to your question, the litmus test, if I may use the word, would be the success of the IBC. If the IBC is effectively used to deal with the NPA situation, and we will wait to see after the 180-day period is over, in how many such cases it resolves issues successfully to the benefit of all stakeholders, that's the proof of the pudding. So I think just because we've taken an extradition step, that according to me is not sufficient by itself to send out a signal, because that doesn't deal with the NPA issue as such. It's really bringing back somebody to the country. So I think most importantly, we have to use the legal and the regulatory framework to the hilt. Its implementation must be perfect and timely decisions. So you don't wait for a situation to go out of hand. This is what I always wonder, as somebody gave the example, there are companies with 50,000 crores of NPA, or loan defaults. How did we allow the situation to become so alarming? So I think the most important thing is early detection and timely intervention to use the legal process, rather than for allowing the problem to escalate, become gargantuan or Himalayan, and then we have to take sort of steps which may not address the NPA, which is the core issue, as you said, or getting the money back. So the defaults being cured by recovery of money, or companies being revived, somebody else takes over the company and settles the dues of the bank. So it has to be effective in monetary terms, not in messaging terms or signaling terms.
Okay, but I also want to raise the question, and while I know the larger signal and all of that is important, and there should be zero tolerance to anybody who owes money to public sector banks, because this is my money, this is your money, and why on earth should anybody be floundering it? But Professor Charan Singh, if I may come to you, has the law also been too slow, too easy, too relaxed to catch up with Vijay Mallya, and which is why he's taken the system for granted? I mean, at ET now, while we hate witch hunting, we also hate the fact that Vijay Mallya, who was one of India's leading corporates, who was a member of parliament, decided to flee to London and did not decide to come back despite numerous accounts of Supreme Court. I mean, we at ET now do denounce that very much. So let there be no doubt that we are absolutely not soft on Mallya. I think Mallya owes these banks money. He should come back. He should pay it. He should face the law of the land. But has the law also been too lax to catch up? Look at the figures. Vijay Mallya became a chronic defaulter in 2009. By 2010, he had stopped paying dues, TDS, income tax, service tax. Why was KFA declared a non-performing asset in 2014? Why did it take 5 years for the law to catch up with Vijay Mallya? And that's exactly what he took for a ride, did he not?
So look, this is a very good observation, and I would like to emphasize the fact that when we talk of Vijay Mallya, or for that matter other cases, and because the talk of NPAs have just been initiated, In 2009, the default start. In 2010, the picture is changing. It's 2016 that finally he leaves the country. Now, apart from the law, which of course was little relaxed in this case, and for Vijay Mallya to leave itself is a very surprising thing. He's such a well-known face on every airport. He owns the airline himself. But the most important thing to my mind is, where were the bankers when all this was building up? It didn't happen overnight. And where were those chartered accountants and the auditors and the lawyers who were fighting Vijay Mallya's case? You know, I have worked in the Reserve Bank for a couple of years. Reserve Bank sends a team to inspect the banks. By the way, the Reserve Bank gets all information from the banking system within a fortnight. And the issue is in the inspection teams. Were things really precipitating that Vijay Mallya's firms are doing this and there is something happening and the money is not being properly utilized? So I think there's a whole lot of things which one has to really look into. And therefore I say this is not a win-win situation. This is rather a lose-lose situation already. You have seen the debate, where is it heading to? From Vijay Mallya and his NPAs, now we have started talking of the conditions in the prisons today. And if you have read the newspapers today, the CBI officers who are really investigating the case, the story is going on them now, that how did they get their promotion? Now this is the linen which is being washed and been washed in an international court. And that is where my concern is, that in our own country, how did this happen that a person had to leave the country? Now look at the terminology which is being used, absconder, fugitive. Now this is causing me lots of concern as far as an economist is concerned and as far as employment generation and business environment is concerned. Right. So I think the whole issue has to be seen. The more we wash our linen in public in a UK court, the more it gets international audience. We have to think, are we really doing benefit to the country? As far as the amount is concerned, 9,000 odd crore or 7,000 odd crore, whatever you want to fix it at, right. I would rather say there have been many much larger defaults.
Okay, absolutely.
And those defaults have to be examined. And are we incurring much more cost
on account of that? Professor Charan Singh, you've raised some valid points, but I want to get in a word from Mr. Amarjit Chandiok, who's back on the line. We lost the link with you, Mr. Chandiok. The big question, how could India have allowed Vijay Mallya to get away? How could we have allowed Vijay Mallya to flee the country? I mean, he's not someone who people can't recognize. Do you believe that, how could this have happened? How can we ensure that no other defaulter, whether it is Lalit Modi or Vijay Mallya, that all of these, whether you are accused of financial jugglery, or if you are accused of a case of conspiracy to fraud banks, whatever it is, that people can't flee the system, sit in a London and mock the Indian judicial system. How can we ensure that doesn't happen again, Mr. Chandiok?
The part is, number one, we'll have to take our actions promptly. We'll have to ensure, as Mr. Charan Singh just now said, when I have reports after reports with me, if there was something going on, then I should have checked him. And on the date when Mr. Vijay Mallya left, there was no proceedings pending against him. It was not a case that somebody had asked his passport to be impounded or restrained him from traveling abroad. So where was the need? The Supreme Court has said that a right to travel is also fundamental for me. So if all these are right, then where is the question of us being an absconder or fugitive today? Only when you prove him to be one. But today the fact of the matter is that Vijay Mallya, sitting in London, also offered that he was ready to pay the money at whatever rate he wanted to. I thought the best option for the government of India was to recover that, negotiate with him and probably get a better rate. Today haircut would come to, if 4,500 he was paying earlier, probably we could have negotiated and got him for 5,000, 6,000. If an IBC were to take place, his liquidation value would not even come to 2,000. So what are we achieving by it? If ultimate aim is to recover money and to send a signal to people that we must have discipline, and therefore the question number one is, are we disciplining our people who are in business and entrepreneurship to pay back fast? Look at the new ordinance. It also goes against the very spirit of the IBC, where you are saying, I will not be allowed to rehabilitate myself. Supposing, take for example, any industry today could have gone down. With every business, there's a risk involved. So if I've done something wrong, then prosecution must take place. And there should be an order of the court restraining me from moving out of the country. Without that, how could we say he's fled away from the country and taking the Indian judiciary or Indian legal system to a mockery? He's not doing that. His right was to go there. He went on valid documents. It is not that he has gone and taken an asylum in London. That's not the case here. So the question today is, what have you got against him to prove your criminal conspiracy, your fraud, which on a very, very higher footing? And forget that part. Maybe the extradition court may not look into the merits of the case. But the fact is, as we have raised earlier, what are the circumstances under which he is going to get a fair trial in India is the first and foremost question, which I don't think we'll be able to answer it.
Right. No, I understand that, but Mr. Chandyok, I will just ask you a quick follow-up before I go across to Gopal Jain. And Mr. Chandyok, my follow-up to you is, you're right, it was well within his right. There wasn't a restraining order against him. He could have travelled to London. But the fact is that he was a member of parliament when he went. He had to have the respect for the judicial process. The Supreme Court issued summons for him. The Supreme Court said he should come back and face trial. As a member of parliament, shouldn't he have paid heed?
Which parliamentarian are we talking about today? Simply because we are member parliament, we have seen what all has been happening in this country. We must bring more restriction. We have gone to courts and said, charge-sheeted politicians, he'll still be entitled to contest the elections. So what rules are we raising for ourselves? We must give actions, put those actions to ourselves first before we raise fingers to the others. What Mr. Charan Singh said just now is the right thing. In international court, why are we bringing the dirty linen, washing it before them and bringing all these things? Are we sending a signal to the people of the abroad and many parts of the world that this is what is going to happen to a businessman if he fails in his business venture? That's the position today. I have to look at a larger situation in this field today. And if my economy is today from 5.7 gone to 6.3, I am looking at 7 or 8%. I better forget Mallya. Mallya is one. I better look at something more positive results to look at my economy rather than only looking at Mr. Mallya. Mr. Vijay Mallya being prosecuted won't bring my economy to 9% or 8%. I have to do certain things there. I must improve my prisons. I must bring regularly new law, probably a new manual for prison for people who are doing this white collar crime to be in case of punishment or in holding. But today the entire media, entire government, everybody who gets up morning, evening talks of Vijay Mallya.
I'll tell you why, Mr. Chandyok.
All this material is available with Mr. Vijay Mallya. Itself is sufficient.
Okay, I get that point, and which is why we're debating with a panel that is sort of bringing issues that I can bet no other news channel in this country is debating, and may I say no newspaper is also talking about him, because the media has painted him in one brush as a villain, as a defaulter, as a fraud, as a swindler. The media has done its job in painting, and we don't want to do a trial by media in this channel. But I'll tell you why that it has caught public imagination. Because, the government rightly has made him a test case. It sent a signal to all of corporate India, to all promoters, that you cannot take the system for granted. That public money is public money, that money of taxpayer is what capitalizes public sector banks. You cannot assume that this is money that exists in perpetuity. It's a signal, number one. Number two is at least the CBI and Enforcement Directorate have both alleged a case of fraud and criminal conspiracy. Now, it hasn't been proven in a court of law, but they have alleged a case of fraud and criminal conspiracy. But Gopal Jain, I'm coming to you, and then I'm going to go to Maithili for her take. Has India done the right thing by making this a test case, by making Vijay Mallya the poster boy of bad loans to India? Because, like it or not, today every promoter in this country will think twice before defaulting on a loan. Gopal Jain.
Only time will tell whether it's a successful test case or a failed test case. So, they can showcase him to be the test case. But as I said earlier, the real test would be when there's effective recovery of money. That's when the system will work. And broadly, from what everyone has said so far in the discussion, the government doesn't seem to have a strong enough case. So to make a weak case as your test case may send out not the signal that you want, but a signal that, look, they try this, it doesn't work, so we are okay. So I think idea should be to use the implementation and the rigors of the law effectively to make sure that a defaulter pays for it rather than, face extradition, that possibly with the poor track record that we have, get away from it. So I think this whole strategy has to be rethought on what should be made out as a test case. And for example, if you really used IBC successfully, that's a better example of a good test case. You brought a new law specifically to deal with this situation, enforce that effectively. I think that will send out a better signal, and that may be the real test case which will be a deterrent to defaulters, that they'll have to pay a price for, or there's a system which will undo the fruits of their wrongdoing. So I think we really need to go back to the drawing board and think this through, and also it's much better to fight on your own turf in India on these substantive issues rather than wash dirty linen and fight on overseas territory and jurisdiction where our performance has so far statistically been weak.
Okay, I get your point that if you have to make a test case, you have to perhaps make a winnable test case. But Maitli, a quick point also on the bankers. I mean, how about prosecuting those guys, the guys who kept giving him loans, the guys who kept restructuring, the guys who did not wince an eyelid when, he was defaulting? What about the other party involved, which is the bankers?
Supriya, this is a question that is often asked, and most people who ask this question really do not know how banking is done, for the simple reason that banking is also about the business of taking risks. When an account starts showing signs of problems, the banker has to decide, is it worth giving is it worth some hand holding? Should you try and lend some further support, or should you withdraw entirely? Because if you withdraw and recall your loan, the entire account might become bad, and whatever little chance there was for recovery, in fact, even that is lost. In fact, as my colleague and senior Swaminathan Iyer once mentioned, he said it's very surprising that those bankers who gave loans to Vijay Mallya, Kingfisher Airlines in the first final trouble are being accused of scam, but those who are lending to Air India, whose position is much worse, and which company which owes much more money to the banks than Vijay Mallya's Kingfisher, why is it that they are not considered scamsters? So the simple answer to your question really is that this is a business decision that the bank takes. Sometimes the decision that they take to nurse the unit, to lend some more money works, and their account turns around, and sometimes it is money down the drain. So as long as no malified intent is proven, I think it's very wrong, in fact, to take action against the bankers, and in the process what you will have is a situation is not only will corporates not be willing to take risks, bankers will also not be willing to lend, and we are getting very close to a situation like that where we are in a complete logjam. Corporates are very reluctant to take risks because a business risk which goes wrong, they might be charged with criminal actions, and bankers who lend, if a decision to lend goes wrong, there again they may be penalized. And in fact, in the case of Vijay Mallya's case, there were 3 senior officials of IDBI Bank who spent many days behind bars on the grounds that, well, they were guilty without being proven, and they got bail with a great deal of difficulty. So I think this kind of situation where we really go overboard and assume guilt without being proven, that I think works entirely to the disinterest, against the interest of the bankers, the corporates, and the country at large.
All right, Nirav Shah, you've been listening patiently to this debate as it unfolds. Let's talk about another gentleman who logically should have got as much of media attention as Vijay Mallya has, but unfortunately hasn't, and that's Lalit Modi. Another case of someone who absconded from the country, and in this case, after being proven of having committed financial irregularity. Why is it that he doesn't make the headlines? Why is it that he doesn't occupy sort of national attention as Vijay Mallya has?
In mild terms, he's currently not the flavor of the season, as Mr. Vijay Mallya is. And there was a point of time when we were all obsessed with Lalit Modi. So, the cycle has turned. It's not Lalit Modi anymore, it's Vijay Mallya. But I would like to make one more distinction here and try to highlight one point which Maithili made, is we use the term defaulters and willful defaulters interchangeably. There is a very fine distinction amongst these two terms. Every willful defaulter is a defaulter, but every defaulter is not a willful defaulter. And unfortunately, what gets reported widely across the media is any time a promoter defaults on the loan, he is immediately put in the bracket of a willful defaulter. What we need to be sensitive about is that it may be a genuine business default. The promoter may have landed himself in genuine business trouble, as a result of which he may have defaulted on the loan. But that does not necessarily make him a willful defaulter. There are certain very stringent criteria laid down by the RBI circular as to who will be a willful defaulter. If you do not comply with those requirements, it is incorrect to brand any such person as a willful defaulter. To take an illustration, the ordinance which was issued by the government under the IBC last week, they set down certain disqualification criteria for promoters to bid in terms of reviving the company. One of the criteria was declaration as a willful defaulter. Now, to my mind, that ordinance presupposes that all promoters of defaulting companies are dishonest, and the entire ordinance proceeds on that premise, which to my mind is a fundamentally flawed logic.
Okay, Mr. Chandyok, I'll come to you, and the question really has to do, yes, Lalit Modi may no longer be the flavor of the season, and Vijay Mallya is, and which is why there is so much of attention on him. But let's talk about a certain Mr. Jatin Mehta. He is the second largest willful defaulter, the promoter of Winsome Diamond. He has given up his citizenship. He's taken up the citizenship of St. Kitts, now lives in Dubai. Do you also believe that Mallya, I mean, I know you think that he's being wrongly prosecuted by the media and by the public interest in him and the politics at play, but do you also believe that somewhere along the line, Mallya's very lavish, very flamboyant, very visibly upscale lifestyle also did him in?
Of course, that is one of the biggest reasons for his being chosen. Therefore, I thought anybody who would have started these proceedings would have seen its facts. Simply because he was living very lavishly and a very luxurious life is no ground for seeking extradition from a person. Therefore, the question is, I should have been, if I wanted to set an example, I should have taken up the case even if it was an ordinary entrepreneur or somebody who has not done this, and probably tried that case first in point of time if I wanted to send a signal to people that please don't default, don't do fraudulent acts. But what am I looking at? I have taken this lifestyle as the basis because his lifestyle has been like this, therefore the fraud has taken place. That can't be a ground. I'm sure there are enough people in this country who lived very luxuriously and some people may like to live luxuriously even in a small apartment. The others may live very luxuriously in a villa. The third may go to a bungalow. But that's not the ground for me extraditing me. The point that we are making is, as the facts of the case today, the fact that from 2009 to 2016, you did not take any action. The Reserve Bank itself provides for CDR and other schemes under which rehabilitation to take place. Then where is the question today of saying he was willful defaulter if you have restructured his loan one after the other? If the government or the public sector banks were responsible for restructuring his loans, maybe at his request, and it did not work out, then how do you call him a willful defaulter or for that matter a fraud? If the fraud was, then the fraud must start from 2009 or even prior to that when the NPAs started. How do you trace it back to that date after you have already completed rehabilitation programs for him, restructured his loans and restructured everything time and again 2-3 times? That's the question that we are posing. The question today is, are the facts of the case giving a clear signal to the magistrate in London court that this is a case where the man has actually done crimes in the soil of India and must be sent back to face the trial in Indian courts?
Okay.
Or because of this, and over and above that, once my facts are weak, the second is I have created a media phobia against him. These two collective facts itself will go against the government of India. And it is worthwhile, I think, still even now, to probably start a mediation or something and probably recover the money and get away with it.
Okay. A fair point, Mr. Chandyok, and again, we do want to sort of clear the air for the benefit of our viewers that that our case is not on account of the alleged willful default, but on account of a criminal conspiracy and fraud when it comes to a loan that Kingfisher Airlines got from IDBI Bank. So that's the case that's being pursued by both the CBI and ED. So it's money laundering and not so much willful default as far as the extradition case is concerned, just to sort of clear the air. But Professor Charan Singh, let me come to you then. And no matter which side of the debate you are in, will you dispute the fact that this entire issue, this entire episode will act as a deterrent this scene, if you see it in the context of the IBC ordinance, and Mr. Chandiok also criticized some parts of it, and so did Maithili, but if you see it in the context of the IBC ordinance and this, it almost seems as if this is a government that has thrown its kitchen sink at this issue of willful default, at this issue of people, fat cat promoters, bankrupting their company, and then sort of, defaulting on their loans, and have absolutely think that they can sort of, game the system, for lack of a better word. Has this served as a deterrent to other promoters? Would you at least concede that?
So, I want to bring certain facts to your notice. I live in Bangalore and I teach at IIM Bangalore, and I had put 2 of my students to do a study on Vijay Mallya case and the default that had taken place there. We could not reach his office. We wrote to everybody. We could not reach his chartered accountants and talk to them in person, though we started some correspondence. But we were able to speak to some of the bankers who were involved in the case. But before I tell you that, I want to, as a professor, I teach my students and I take very simple examples. If we are talking of a test case, I'm super worried right now. What type of a test is this, that if I scold my student and he leaves the class and he doesn't take the course anymore, and I spend rest of my life in getting him back into my class? You can take the simple example of a child being scolded and he leaves your home. That's the first thing. The second thing, I've been a commercial banker myself and worked in Punjab National Bank. Let me tell you and give you a simple example. The compounder knows the patient even before the doctor comes to know about it. And in this case, I would like to mention the banker who has lent money to the industry knows immediately where the problem is creeping, what's happening to the blood pressure, where is the temperature rising. So as a banker, you are the first person who knows where the money is. Now coming to the study, and that connects with the question that you had mentioned, and also connects with certain discussions that have taken place just in the last 1 hour. When I spoke to the bankers and said, what's going on? And how could you do this? And how could you value the goodwill of a person to this extent? I had very, very cogent answers. That is why I am taking objection to the fact that a person is being called an absconder or is being called a fugitive. I'm nobody playing this and that. I don't take Kingfisher beer. I have never flown Kingfisher airline, but I'm telling you a fact. When a loan is seen for commercial viability, the commercial banker looks at the cash flow and the circumstances. And the bankers whom we interviewed told us that in 2004 and 5, when Kingfisher was proposing all this airline, the thoughts were very clear. We have a 5-star culture coming up in the country. The economy is shooting at 9% and above. And we thought this is a very useful venture which will give lots of return. And the bankers were telling me that, look, foreigners coming into India in large numbers and cashing on the India growth story. They live in 5-star hotels in Delhi and Bombay, but then they have to travel in between the 2 countries in airlines which give them a third-rate service conditions. So here is the man who said, I will move them from one 5-star hotel to another 5-star hotel, giving them a 5-star feeling even during airlines. So the commercial bankers were assessing the loan applications, keeping the commercial viability of the project. And that is why I said the bankers also, 13 of them need to be examined and said, what were you looking at?
Right. No, we did raise that point that should bankers also be a part of this, and Maithili did explain the other point of view. You're giving a diametrically opposite point of view. But Leader Shah, do you believe this kills the risk appetite of the promoter class? You know, and will banks be far more cautious in lending to them? That's one side of the debate. And the other side of the debate is that for ease of doing business, or for creation of jobs, or for, you know, good business sentiment, should we brush aside issues like this? I mean, issues where corporates owe to banks, banks that have to be recapitalized by public sector money, banks that have to be recapitalized by hard-earned taxpayers' money. You know, it's a very difficult balance in that sense. So, there's on one side there's risk appetite of corporates who will be creating jobs, and on the other is, of course, the whole point about if they do go ahead, what happens?
So,
I'm quite certain that there's not something that we should brush aside. Probably the need of the hour is to overhaul the entire system of lending, because clearly what system we currently have is not quite working well for us if you look at the large number of NPAs. I think banks, while appreciating the fact that they need to be aware of the commercial exigencies, they need to be aware of the risk-taking appetite of the promoter, and they need to back projects where they feel they can make money. But at the same time, if they need to observe certain thumb rules in terms of lending to ensure that how exactly the loan amount is being applied, what is the kind of security that is being furnished, if an immobile property is given a security, is the property still there, is the property mortgaged to other banks, if yes, what is the loan outstanding with those banks, the promoters who give personal guarantees, the corporate promoters who give corporate guarantee, what is the net worth of those guarantors, because invariably on so many occasions we've seen that the personal guarantors, when the guarantee is invoked, the net worth is so low that it's not, the guarantee is not what the paper it is written on. So to my mind, to sum up, I think we need to overhaul the complete system in order to ensure that we do not have a situation that we are currently facing, where the banks have to write off in excess of 6,000 crore rupees, and at the same time recapitalize at the cost of a common man.
Okay, you've summed it up well. I'm afraid we're completely out of time. I did have one follow-up question for Maithili, but I'm completely timed out, so we'll have to wrap it here. Thank you so much, this is a wonderful panel, for joining us on the show, India Development Debate. I can tell our viewers that very few people would do a debate like this on a day like today, when when media would go all out in labeling Mallya a swindler. We've tried to get you the other perspective as well on the facts of the situation and the costs and consequences of this Mallya chase. But important to tell our viewers that at the end of the day, he deserves a fair trial, and that if he is guilty, he must face the law of the land. He must return to India to face the law of the land and to stand up for the consequences of his actions. Of course, it must be a free and fair trial, and that goes without saying. Thanks so much for being with us on this edition of the India Development Debate.
Thank you very much for being with us. We'll take a quick breather. Up next is Top 10 at 10 with Tanya Bharadwaj.